Get your knives out. It's time to peel back more layers of the glass onion. Benoit Blanc has broken the boredom with another case of rich people treating each other badly. And there's enough detail for a double dip of the onion. Dip. That almost got away from me there at the end. One thing we know about a Benoit Blanc mystery: at some point, he's gonna describe its nature in a folksy smile that starts to fold in on itself. Whether it's donuts and donut hole layers of an onion, you can presumably see through, but is distorted. Or just Glass Onion being the first song title with glass in it that Ryan Johnson found. That actually is true. Still a fun movie, but this isn't a J.J. Abrams joint. Nothing is in this movie just to be in the movie. You heard me, J.J. Open the box.
What's in the box?
In Glass Onion, every detail tells the story. Like Cain's Jawbone. Cain's Jawbone is part of Blanc's bathtub reading, when he's not playing Among Us with his celebrity pals. Like the movie, Cain's Jawbone is itself a puzzle. The reader is actually left to piece together what order the chapters are supposed to be in. It's the kind of non-linear storytelling that in film became popular through Quentin Tarantino. Just like Knives Out, Glass Onion would also make effective use of non-linear storytelling. As we hope was made clear in the first video, Miles Braun is an idiot. In fact, being an idiot means that he sat momentarily in Benoit's blind spot. He just hadn't accounted for someone being that stupid. In fact, he brushes off the idea that he'd be stupid enough to murder someone he was in a very public rivalry with. Miles, however, has managed to stand so hard on the Dunning-Kruger effect that my self-doubt has lapped itself, and not just his sesquipedalian tendencies. That's kind of an ironic way of someone using smart-sounding words to sound smart, but isn't like Miles. The Disruptors fawn over the genius of the puzzle, even though Duke's mom solves most of it. But after Blanc needles Braun over the childish puzzles, a frustrated Braun admits they were made by his puzzle guy, and he wasn't even aware if the puzzles could be reclosed. The elaborate murder mystery he initially claims credit for, he later admits it was written for him. When Braun talks to Blanc about the murder mystery, he humble brags about it, going so far as to say,
"I don't want to toot my own horn, but it's pretty next level."
And by next level, he means he left the writing of his murder mystery to the next level murder mystery writer, Gillian Flynn, author of Gone Girl. It's part of the quality by association, the name drop. It joins the slightly more comedic name drop that includes Jared Leto's alcoholic kombucha and Jeremy Renner's hot sauce. Leto and Renner round out a worthy gathering of MCU Batista, my forever champion, plays Drax. Catherine Hahn killed it as Agatha. All Along song is totally in your head now, isn't it? Edward Norton is the first MCU's original Bruce Banner, the second movie Bruce. Jessica Henwick was Colleen Wing in Iron Fist, otherwise known as the best reason to watch Iron Fist. Renner is the best Avenger, Hawkeye. And of course, Leto portrayed the legendary Morbius. When you drink his 9% kombucha, you're morbin the morb. That's still a thing, isn't it? Rounding out the Marvel alum is a brief cameo by Ethan Hawke, who delivers the magic rich person elixir that makes them immune to COVID. It might seem like a lot to bring Ethan Hawke all the way to Greece just so he can shoot a modified glue gun into people's mouths. That's why it was handy that Hawke was already in the area making his Marvel as Arthur Harrow, the baddie in the Moon Knight miniseries. Hawke was actually just visiting set when he was given the role as the weird vaccine guy. Right before that, Batista gives a hat tip to the MCU, from whence the actors came, by greeting his friends with, quote,
Disruptors have assembled.
Birdie probably isn't the swiftest runner in the race. She wouldn't know what names to drop or when to drop them. That doesn't mean she couldn't. During her celebrity-littered party, she gets puzzle help from a legitimately knowledgeable source, even if she doesn't seem to recognize it. When the puzzle plays the fugue, it's none other than legendary cellist Yo-Yo Ma. Given that she doesn't trust him to identify an intro to music appreciation piece, chances are Birdie doesn't know why he's there. In the previous video, we talked about Benoit and his celebrity-based Among Us players. That includes the last appearances of legends Angela Lansbury and Stephen Sondheim. Most people will know Lansbury as the voice of Mrs. Potts from Beauty and the Beast, but those on the older end of things, or with a taste of reruns and nostalgia TV, will also know her as Jessica Fletcher, the murder-solving murder writer from Murder, She Wrote. In fact, they all have mystery connections. Sondheim wrote one of the influences for Glass Onion, The Last of Sheila, along with Anthony Perkins. In that movie, a movie producer on a yacht in the Mediterranean plays a parlor game like a murder mystery game. that ends up in a real murder mystery. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar makes his share of guest appearances in the 70s and 80s detective shows, and Johnson's friend, Natasha Lyonne, has had a starring role in the mind-bending mystery series Russian Doll. The first red herring of the murder mystery comes with the death of Duke. Later we find out it's because he was the first to find out that Andy was not walking around the island, but in fact dead. Seeing as it's clearly not a Weekend at Bernie's situation, that's a problem. In a brief replay of events, we see Duke pick up the glass on accident. Later on, as Benoit puts things together, we get another version of the scene where Miles hands Duke the tainted pineapple drink. Only, we already saw this, we just didn't know to look. In real time, as Miles sits down, we can see him not only slyly hand Duke the tainted cocktail, but later pocket his phone. One thing Benoit is clear about to Helen is that he is not Batman. He's just a world-famous detective. Itself a thing that only exists in fiction. Who can think of a real-world, world-famous detective? Why would that be a thing? It's not a thing. Less of a thing, obviously, is Batman. When it seems all is lost, Benoit reminds Helen he is not Batman, but he handed her an opportunity to do a little Batmaning with a chunk of clear. This time, when he says he's not Batman, he gets a music cue that is reminiscent of Danny Elfman's iconic Batman theme. If you live in or around Silicon Valley, or just watched Silicon Valley, or read one too many issues of Wired, you know disruptor is just a comically overused buzzword. Usually for someone who has figured out a new tech thing, but not how it's supposed to make money. But if you gave them a few $1 million, it might be the next Google. But probably not. Miles described his disruptors, among other things, as people who break things that should be broken, which turns out exactly what they do in the end, when they start smashing stuff. With open-toe shoes, no less. That's how you know they're mad. Helen basically just has a strip of shoe leather strapped loosely to the bottom of her feet. Perhaps the best thing a set designer can hear is, "Go nuts, this guy is tacky." To create Miles' ridiculously overblown glass onion retreat, complete with a shirtless oil painting, production designer Rick Heinrichs was allowed to go all the way over the top. This includes a copy of a Basquiat painting that recently sold to an anonymous bidder for over $93 million. Placing it in the onion implies that the anonymous bidder was one Miles Braun. Very few things in this world are more tacky than a portrait of yourself shirtless hanging among your other priceless works of art. In his grand dining room, he has both art and antiques, including an ancient Greek structure. To complete the look, there is a mural painted in the background of a meeting of a Roman Senate, because Greek and Roman empires are pretty much interchangeable to the slow-witted and uninterested. But for a little bit of extra cheekiness, the man presiding over the Senate in that mural is none other than Yeezy himself, Kanye West. Edward Norton chuckled about it in an interview with Entertainment Weekly as one of his favorite parts of the set that no one talks about. The song that was chosen as the title and central metaphor for the movie, the Beatles' Glass Onion, off the White Album. This was a bit of an act of frustration on John Lennon's part. If you watched Get Back, you learned that Lennon admired Bob Dylan, who would occasionally use nonsense lyrics. So, quote, "I dig a pony" is just something that sounded cool. Imagine his frustration when it turns out that these fans were digging through his lyrics word for word, desperately trying to pull meaning out of every word. That's crazy, right? At least do a YouTube channel about popular movies and TV shows. Like the movie, the Glass Onion song offers a bunch of red herrings, meant to mess with people who read too much into the lyrics. It worked, too. Ask 4 Beatles fans who the Walrus is. At least one of them will tell you about the theory that Paul McCartney was dead. To sew the connection together, many of the doomed crystal sculptures are themed off of Beatles songs mentioned in Glass Onion. A strawberry for Strawberry Fields, a kid on a hill for A Fool on the Hill, and there's even a dovetailed joint. It's not just the Beatles themed art. David Bowie wasn't satisfied just being a genre-defying rock and pop artist. He also had to be a fashion icon. Naturally, he's also a painter. Because why not? Perhaps it's fitting that the artist of the caliber of Janelle Monáe is the one who thrashes the atrium and burns it all down along with the prop Bowie paintings. It's not just portions of the Parthenon and paintings of Kanye presiding over the Senate that takes cues from ancient Greece. While most of the time, the cast refers to the first Janelle Monáe sister as Andy. Andy is short of Cassandra. In Greek mythology, Cassandra was given the ability to see into the future, but then cursed to have no one believe her. Like Cassandra, Andy is telling anyone who will listen that Clear is dangerous. Unfortunately, no one will listen, just like ancient Cassandra. Andy's sister is named Helen, who of course is the excuse for Troy and Greece to go to war after she leaves town for a Spartan. It goes down in history as the worst reaction to rejection known to man. While Helen doesn't launch 1,000 ships, she does bring the boats to the island that she also just snuck in under false pretenses and destroyed. There's a bit of a pattern developing in the Knives Out adventures of Benoit Blanc. In both Knives Out and Glass Onion, the killer was the actor with the second billing. Even further, the victim was the actor whose name follows the "and" in the opening credits. With Glass Onion being only the second in what would eventually be 3 movies, we'll get a chance to test this hypothesis when the third Knives Out movie comes around. Production already pocketed over $400 million for the first 2 entries, with an average budget of $40 million after the bidding war between Amazon and Netflix. One of the earliest clues about what's going on revolves around Baby Blue, Miles' beloved Porsche hypercar. So beloved that he even drags it to the island with him to place on a pedestal above the atrium. It's through the Porsche that Duke keeps trying to tell everyone who killed Andy by bringing up the very recent time Miles almost pancaked Duke when Miles was fleeing the scene of murder. The Porsche in question is a Porsche 918 Spider, a tribute to the 917. The 917 is considered by some to be one of the best race cars ever designed. If you watched Ford vs. Ferrari and were wondering why Ferrari never won again if the GT40 program wrapped after 4 years, it's because the very next year, the 917 showed up and just started winning everything. Demanding prices in the $2 million range, depending on trim, it's just kind of the rich guy thing to have. Because it's also a fitting ride for a guy who spends a lot of the time giving lip service to social responsibility, that's because the 918 is actually a hybrid. There's even a drive mode that allows for 70 miles an hour. But also the 2 electric motors and the fire-breathing V8 produces a combined output just shy of 900 horsepower. Who buys a car that punches to 60 in 2.5 seconds to hypermile it? He has a hybrid, but not one that is terribly focused on efficiency or clean air. Last time around, we picked up on the passing dig at your friends with English degrees, as Benoit talks about Thomas Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow, eventually stating no one reads it, but that it has a cool name. Which it does. Later, the payoff is that the smart mirror has Serena Williams as a trainer. Too much pressure. Serena is passing the time reading, what else? Gravity's Rainbow. Like Cain's Jawbone, there's another layer. Like an onion? Get it? Nah, you get it.
Onions have layers? You get it.
Gravity's Rainbow has been noted for its wild swings between so-called lowbrow and highbrow content, and a juxtaposition between technology, like alpha and clear, and metaphysics, like, well, the stuff Miles just makes up to sound cool. Also, I promised my English major friend that I'd read that book like 10 years ago, so don't mention it if you see him. Over the course of these 2 videos, we've managed to clear that Miles is an idiot, or if you prefer,
Vainglorious buffoon.
Really gotta start calling people vainglorious buffoons. Miles is just about the worst, and he's modeled after some of the biggest figures in being rich and selling both dubious and ubiquitous stuff. Like Amazon and Apple, Alpha operates like a virtual assistant. Like Musk, he is both a car company and a space company. His early attire was inspired by Tom Cruise's look in Magnolia, with a slight dash of Steve Jobs thrown in. Perhaps the truest nod to Silicon Valley aesthetics is hiding in plain sight. That's a lot easier to do with the room being as busy as it is. Lost in all the Beatles crystal sculptures is the knife chair from the first movie. It's so much that it has to hitchhike on another entry for the mention. Hanging over the table is a chandelier that is formed like a crystalline object that just so happens to resemble the questionable clear fuel source. Perhaps the biggest unsolved mystery of Glass Onion is just who the heck is Derol? He makes a few quick appearances at the beginning, with Miles saying that he's just staying there while he goes through some things. His only real lines are to say he's not here or to invite people to have a smoke as they go through the rapidly escalating drama in the house. We last see him watching it all burn down with Benoit. So who is he? Materially, he's Noah Sagan, a close friend of Rian Johnson. Sagan played a police officer in the first movie and now plays a character Johnson said was inspired by Kato Kellen, the hapless house guest of O.J. Simpson. At around the worst time to be a house guest of O.J. Simpson, Johnson liked the idea of someone who was just there. And he'd get to hang out with his friend in Greece. Win-win. Glass Onion completes the trifecta of rich people behaving badly and bad things happening to them, complete with a triangle of sadness and the menu. All things considered, the Prestige season has not been a good time to be rich and on an island. It just doesn't end well for the most involved.